Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. My name is Jeff Blankenberg, and as we do every week, we're here to answer your questions about Alexa development, voice design, ambient computing, and all things related to Alexa. So as I like to start our episodes with, I want to lead off with a few announcements and mentions just to keep you guys in the know about everything that's going on. If you missed it, last week we had one of our Tech Talks air. It was about monetization and how to monetize your skills. And if you missed it, we have a link. The video is now available on YouTube, so you can tune in and you can check that out. Always a good conversation to have about monetization because not only can we do things like in-skill purchasing where you can sell things inside your skills, but we also have opportunities to sell your skill directly, to be able to sell products from Amazon.com, and even using Amazon Associates. Lots and lots of cool things covered there, and I would recommend you check that one out. The other one is we have a monthly newsletter. If you're not subscribed today, it's a great resource for you to be able to know exactly what's going on with everything related to Alexa development, whether that's new hackathons or new articles, or even just some new resources and tools that might be available to you. So I'll also share a link right there, alexa.design/newsletter sign up, that will allow you to very easily sign up for the newsletter, get all that information in your inbox, and know exactly what's going on. The last thing I want to share with you is that next week is our last episode of the year. Now, I know we don't have a lot of year left anyway, but this is going to be our last episode of the year. We're going to take a couple of weeks off for the holidays. And so next week, it's going to be a very special episode. We're actually bringing in our director of business to business and developer programs, Kelly Wenzel. I don't think we've had her on Office Hours here before, but you've seen her if you've watched the Alexa Live keynotes, as well as a lot of the things that we did with Artemis. So if you'd like to hear her recap and us discussing all of the cool things that have happened in 2022, that's going to happen next week here on Office Hours. But for now, we're focused on today. First, I want to apologize. Between going to reInvent and then going to spend a little time off with COVID last week was not planned at all. My hair is about as long as it's ever gotten. So we're just going to deal with the mess that's on my head today. And with that, I want to welcome our guest today, Philippe Lantin. So Philippe is a principal solution architect, but I want him to share his role here and why he's joining us here on Office Hours. So Philippe, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Pleased to meet you, everyone. So as Jeff said, I'm a principal solutions architect. And so right up until very recently, I helped design device makers integrate Alexa into their own products. I moved recently into a role into AWS and now help the Alexa teams on the inside, which is also fun and a great time for me.
Well, thank you for being here. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today, and I'm really excited to get some insight into this, is about what did it take to get Alexa into space? That's kind of our topic that I want to have with you. So I guess the first question as we dig into this is like, how did the project start? How did we decide that Alexa in space was a thing that we wanted to do?
Yeah, the story started in 2018, actually.
Wow.
So it's been, great, more than 4 years now. Lockheed Martin approached us in September 2018. And, they were looking for a way to make sure the public was engaged, right? On a long-term mission that would be unmanned, which is Artemis 1. So you can imagine, right? Their concern is like, okay, we want to make sure that, the public at large, who is really funding, right, the Artemis missions and other things that are going on with NASA, they want to make sure that, hey, we want the public's excitement, and what can we do also on the technology side that we're not doing to kind of like prove out certain things that we haven't never done before. And so they approached us in September and said, hey, can we put a voice assistant in space? And so that's where it started. And so we had an initial meeting with them. And then me and my other colleagues said, we are about 70% sure we can do this. And so
that's a good vote of confidence.
That's right. That's an Amazon kind of edict. If you're 70% sure, go for it. And so we wrote a 6-pager on it and got our senior leadership approval in January.
So great. And so I would imagine with that 70%, there's 30% that you're like, I have no idea how any of this is going to work. And there had to be some pretty major technical challenges that go into that. I think about any project I've ever built. I know how all of this stuff is going to work, but this thing over here, this is a big question mark for me. What were the big question marks for you?
Yeah, I'd say a big first came out in actually, the very first week where they engaged us. They said, well, this is a unmanned mission. We don't have an audio subsystem. So there was no way to get audio on board the craft. So Alexa, as a virtual assistant on the craft, how do you get sound out there if we can't transmit sound? And so Lockheed Martin asked us to create a solution by which we could transmit audio and get audio back. That was a big challenge. So we, obviously, designing Alexa with microphones and speakers, we're familiar with it, but it's quite a different endeavor to build a space-rated intercom.
Yeah, for sure. So are there any other things that stood out to you that were major challenges as we think about, I have to imagine there's a number of technical hurdles beyond the microphone issue, which certainly sounds like not something that I would want to get involved with. But was there anything else that stood out to you that was remarkably like a technical achievement?
Yeah. So if you can think, operating in space, we needed to make sure right from the get-go that it was an offline experience, right? We, for, 97% or so of the utterances that we've done as part of this experiment, they were all offline. So that's a very new technology to Amazon, and to have it perform well. So offline means it will not reach out to the cloud for answers. You directly answer locally. This is a technology we mainly use in the auto space. And it's used in the auto space because we have requirements to make sure that offline works when you're, for example, in the middle of nature, and you still need voice to work, as you would expect. We also use it in some of our devices when they go offline to do simple things like volume control, calendar, and those kind of very simple smart home commands can be done offline as well. But that was a major challenge. Like, how do we build up the vocabulary and build up the language models necessary to answer, what people are going to ask from the ground?
That's great. So we have a pretty technical audience here. I'd love to know, as deep as we can go, and you're always welcome to say, well, I can't really talk about that if we're digging into things that we can't. But this is incredibly interesting to me, and so I'd love to dig a little deeper. So is there a set of vocabulary that is designed specifically to run on board? Like, I imagine, let's use the car scenario, right? If I want to know how much fuel's in my car or how much pressure in my tires, things like that, those are onboard commands, I would imagine, that work regardless of whether or not I have an internet connection. It's talking directly to the device. And then you have all the cloud stuff, right? I would imagine if I was in the shuttle, I wouldn't be able to ask it for a joke. That's something that's a cloud service that feeds those things in. So is there a major divide between how those two things function? Does the device have a firewall of sorts that says, well, I can handle these things at all times, or how does it handle that kind of logic?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things, like, okay, imagine a device, that might be constructed to answer at home, local voice queries. We call it local voice control, or reach out to the cloud. We have a type of discriminator on board that's able to tell the difference. Oh, I can answer this locally, or I can answer it from the cloud. That's the first. So first is doing speech recognition, right? ASR, right? We recognize the speech, then we ascertain the intent. Based on the intent, we may send it back to the ground. For example, we did a shopping query. We did sports scores queries. We were sending those back to the ground. And that's how we did that is another topic entirely. But if it stays on device, we have the equivalent of local skills that work on the device to actually answer the proper question. And so I'll give you an example. So, the developers on this channel are all familiar with how we do Alexa skills. Well, you can actually do Alexa skills using local voice controls, and we do this for the auto space.
Got it.
And then, so for example, the one of those was actually controlling the lights on board Orion, and so that's how we could do things like party mode. So it was like a smart home skill implemented locally on the device.
Super cool. I haven't seen the video that showed party mode, but that sounds That sounds pretty incredible to have a little party in space.
One anecdote there is we couldn't show the color red. Cannot show the color red.
Cannot show the color red. Is that a security concern?
That is a security concern. If it's red, it means bad. So
Right.
NASA said no color
Right.
red.
That's boy, that's good to know. That I can see how that would be a major concern at times. One of the other thoughts I had, and again, this is my very ignorant brain asking these questions, so I apologize. But one of the things that I was thinking about as we talk about taking Alexa into space is that internet is obviously at a premium, right? That's a pretty challenging thing to accomplish. But as I think more and more about all of the satellite internet technology that we have today, so a number of companies that are broadcasting internet signals from space, I would imagine those are all aimed for the most part at Earth. But is that something that we can tie into, or are we more reliant when we do need an internet connection to the shuttle on something that's being broadcast all the way from the planet?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I've had the opportunity to kind of dive deep there throughout the mission. One was actually ascertaining, it's like, okay, what can we support, or what kind of bandwidth can we expect, right, from a mission like this? I can't divulge the exact numbers, but let's say it's a little bit higher than what you might expect a modem from the 1990s to have.
Got it. That's kind of, I expected you might even have the squealing noise, but yeah, that's about what I would expect. I think speed wise.
Yeah, and for deep
14
space, we use the since it's in deep space, we can't actually use the low orbit satellites yet. So, however, I'm sure there's a lot of technology that's actually evolving there to get better antennas for deep space missions. But for us, for now, it was actually the Deep Space Network, and you can find information on that. It's public.
That's awesome. I learned something new today. That's great. All right, so we got Alexa into a shuttle, had it go up and orbit the moon. Ultimately, this will be a moon landing tool as well. Well, at least the shuttle will be. But I'm curious, as we think about the things that we learned from putting Alexa in space, what are some of the things that we can carry forward that may apply to some of the stuff we see here on Earth?
Definitely constructing the local voice control models efficiently, and so that they can run, on perhaps less memory, for example, more elaborate models, getting faster response times for those queries. Those are things that we're carrying back as lessons learned that we can apply to on Earth. Another one is we learned actually a lot about the acoustic conditions in space, and many of those conditions that we encountered are actually similar to what you might encounter at home. So one of those acoustic conditions we encountered was actually the use of filters by the mission control. So that's used in Houston. So typically they use what's called a voice loop system that's restricted in bandwidth. And as it turns out, when we were doing speech recognition tests using that voice loop, because we want to use it. I mean, it's a great system, allows us to actually use their microphones and their technology. But unfortunately, they had filters on there, and speech recognition was about 85%, which is pretty far from what is acceptable to us. Yeah. And so, those are the things like, okay, but can we actually tune our ASR to function in using those filters? No, that's still a question that we're working on.
Can you go into any more depth about the word filter? I feel like that's an overloaded term sometimes, especially in space. There's a number of things that may come. Is it eliminating certain words from being broadcast, or is it just skimming down on the quality of the audio that's being sent out? I'm curious what you meant by filters there.
Oh yeah, I meant so the frequency of human voice goes up to about 4 kilohertz, or thereabout. It actually goes up to 8 kilohertz, but the most of the energy is contained within 4. But if you have a high pass, what's called a high pass filter that cuts off after 4, you're actually, that remaining bit of energy, you're taking out information, which is very useful for voice recognition. Now, if I'm on an old style POTS phone call with you, I can understand you just fine. But speech recognition systems are tuned specifically for a voice frequency range. So, we want the full bandwidth as much as possible, and it helps us do the most accurate job.
Got it. I think that makes total sense to me. So I wasn't sure what we meant by filters there, but I'm imagining, I'm trying to come up with something that isn't too gross. But it's like trying to take, you're trying to fit a signal that's this big into a tube that's this big, and so you really only get that middle slice.
That's right.
Is that an accurate representation?
That's right. And we run into situations like this with the quality of microphones. Certain microphones might not have great characteristics across the full range of voice frequency, and so you can adjust what's called your audio front end to kind of like regulate those dips and highs. It's the same kind of thing that our device makers do every day.
Yeah. It's interesting, as Alexa skill developers, this is actually one of the things we get to take for granted. That has all been already tuned and maximized to make it as good as we possibly can have it for the ASR that's going to happen, for the NLU that results afterward. And so I just say, well, okay, they're going to say these words and I'm going to hear them, and it's going to come through and do the things that I need my skill to do. But it sounds to me like there's a ton of science that actually goes into all of this, which is fantastic.
It's getting better all the time too. We developed neural technology on our newest fourth generation devices to also help with speech recognition. You can find out more online about that as well.
Cool. And is this one of those problems that ultimately we'll just say, we don't need to spend any more time on this? This problem is solved? Because it doesn't feel like it's completely solved, right? I mean, we're continuing to work on it. We're continuing to improve it. But is there a point where we just say, there's no point in going any further? It's fantastic.
Oh, I don't think that ever happens or should happen.
Okay.
We should always strive to do better. Even if you're at 99.9% recognition, you could do that additional 9, right? It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that second 9's a lot of work too, I'll bet.
Yes.
But that's great to hear. All right, so now's the point in the episode where I'd like to stop and see what some folks have been saying in the chat. Oftentimes we'll find a lot of really great questions that may relate back to things you and I have talked about so far. But let's see what's going on here. So A. Witter says he hopes I've recovered. I didn't mention this to you, Philippe, but I was out last week with COVID, and I don't wish that on anyone. It's the second time I've had it, and it's just miserable. Coughing and all sorts of congestion, just gross. Brian Tarbox is working on his Premier League skill. And he said he's got some multimedia in there now. That's super cool. So if you guys have checked that out, that's always good. Let's see. Robot TX5. This is a general question, but I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Philippe. Can my skill be used in space?
A good question. So let me ask you this. So first of all, what is space? Okay. So space, right? 100 miles up, right? So you could be actually in low Earth orbit. And the reason this matters is that a traditional Alexa skill is cloud powered, right?
Right.
So, low Earth orbit, for example, this is public information, but latency, for example, to the low Earth orbit might be somewhere around 500 milliseconds. So we've done some testing, and actually, Alexa does function at that latency. It does work. It's just a little slower.
Right.
If you can get used to that, and we're used to instant response, but if you can get used a little bit to the latency, and there's actually additional things we could do to reduce those experiences on custom devices, you could actually do a normal skill if you were in a low Earth orbit station, for example.
Got it. But a traditional Alexa experience is much harder, say at Moon's range, because the latency is just too great. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So when you're talking about deep space, so you have to start with the deep space network. So during this mission, and actually most deep space network missions, you're actually using a satellite band that has anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds of latency one way. It's not so much about physical distance, but actual signal to get to the actual craft might need to actually bounce between multiple Earth stations in order to get to the craft. And so this adds latency, and that's why you're seeing that latency. So 2 to 5 seconds is unfortunately too long to be to have any kind of real time cloud experience. And for some of the developers that might know it, the Alexa service, functions on a TCP connection, backed by an HTTP2. So it's just not possible with those kinds of latencies. Yeah.
Sure. Makes sense. I mean, you see that in film all the time where they're further out. They're on a mission to Mars or something like that, and it's a 30-minute round trip to be able to have that kind of conversation.
That's right.
Seems realistic though, but that's obviously a major challenge in electronic communications and the latency that it introduces for sure.
You have to get rid of the idea of having two-way communication instantly. So there's more information on those for those that are interested. They're trying to create an internet protocol, cross-planetary one. It's a great read.
Wow. I'll have to track that down if we don't have the link to it. That sounds really interesting, actually. And I would imagine that's something also that astronauts have to train for. How do I best have a conversation when I know there's potentially minutes between replies?
Yeah, astronaut health is a huge topic, and so imagine it's like you're in outer space. It's like you want to keep in touch with family. And so, these are use cases that, we really thought of, during this mission. It's like, okay, how can we enable the astronaut to feel more connected to Earth? And that's why we want to make sure to showcase things like, oh, give me the sports scores, or, a future one might be, did my kids send me any messages while I was sleeping? Those kinds of things, because you can't talk to them real time, but just having those, the ability to do that would be fantastic.
Oh, for sure. I imagine just based on this conversation alone, we're going to have some more questions. But for now, and I don't know how much you know about the Alexa Connect kit, but the person says that they know that there's somewhat built-in smart home capability interfaces. I'd like to make my device interaction a little more complex than it is possible with these interfaces. Although it's not usually necessary, is it possible to still create my own custom skill and integrate it with the ACK module? I am not a smart home expert, at least from the technical side. I spend a lot more of my time on the skills side. Have you spent any time with the ACK stuff?
I can briefly tell you about what the ACK is about. ACK is mostly about enabling smart home devices, really easily and out of the box with Alexa. Skills that are you can have a skill that features, a smart home. I'd be interested to know, we have standardized smart home interfaces that are available, including ones that have more custom interfaces. I would need to know a little bit more about, what kind of the gaps you're seeing before I could answer, though.
Sure. Well, what I've seen some people do is we've offered in the past kind of a combination custom skill, smart home skill, where you can control a specific device, but there's also a voice experience that's attached to it that is a broader model than just turn on, turn off, or set a temperature, something like that. So I think that's what they're asking. What I don't know is if there's compatibility between ACK and a custom skill. But it seems likely that would be possible, because ACK is much more about controlling the device than it is about the skill interface.
A custom skill can be used to interface with other IoT equipment, including ACK.
Cool. And I just had one of our folks behind the scene note that we're going to have some of the folks from the smart home team on early next year. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to chat with them a little deeper about that.
Great.
All right. Moving on in my list of questions. And this goes back to when we were talking about local onboard commands versus cloud-based commands in the shuttle module. So Dana Voice wants to know, he says, I would like an LED on my device that lets me know that, hey, I'm processing this locally versus making a call to the cloud. And we're not here to make any product announcements or future kinds of things, but is that something that we're thinking about making it possible for any skill developer to build things that would run locally versus in the cloud?
So far the market we've tried to address with that is the auto market. So we've really not expanded beyond that. But it's a great question. Like, what should the UX be when the device is actually answering locally? should you actually let the user know via some kind of mechanism?
Yeah. I've always wondered about that. I've heard some great stories about Alexa being used in manufacturing environments where you're working on an assembly line and you have your bucket of parts as you're assembling whatever the thing is that's moving past you, and you get low on parts, and so you just talk into the air, hey, I'm low on bolt 742 or whatever it is, and that signals something in another room. They don't have to stop what they're doing. They can use their voice. They don't have to push a button or anything like that. And it alerts the stock team that, hey, we need to bring him more bolts so he can continue doing what he's doing. But I imagine there are times, especially in those kinds of environments, where internet connectivity could be spotty or challenging. And especially as you start to think about the more supervisory roles that happen there, about what's happening and what's going on, it would be interesting to think about onboard storage of a small amount, but that there's almost a push mechanism that's pushing data into the device so that when you query it, you're talking to the local latest rather than having to make cloud calls that might be slow or require an internet connection that may or may not be there.
Yeah.
So
there, how we thought about local voice control and its utility is about lowering the latency. So customers want a fast response. And the other part is more efficient. Why reach out to the cloud if you can do it locally? So we have concentrated on those use cases that allow us to perform really well on those things. And so so as things go forward, you'll see more of like, okay, how do we how do we go lower latency wherever we can, right? What are the good use cases for that? And then, as far as, how it reflects to the consumer, we believe the great consumer experience is the lowest latency one. So that's what we're always striving for. Perfect.
It's optimized around latency. I think that's a good, simple way to describe it. Right. Barbara here on Twitch said, and go into as much detail as you can or can't, but how do you secure Alexa transmissions from the space to the ground? I mean, I would imagine some of those are confidential or not data that you would want to share with the broad public.
Yeah, this is very much like a kind of a first innovations part of the things that we're very proud to have showcased that. But there is a data stream that travels through the deep space network that we've used for this. So we work with Lockheed Martin to secure a way by which we could send commands to the vehicle and then receive them. So we're not actually transmitting voice data, but for example, the onboard system was able to transcribe with the ASR. And then once we knew what the intent was, we would send it to the ground and respond back the response. And so this was done using a protocol that some of you may be familiar with called MQTT. And I'd be, it would be a good topic to talk about how we exactly would do that in the future with our engineering crew.
Yeah. Gavin Watson also mentioned, I don't know if he was making this as a joke or if this is real, but it's called the Cross-Planetary Transport Protocol. I think it's the equivalent of the HTTP protocol.
That's right.
Is that what it's actually called? Is that the?
I believe so. That's right. So the research that's going on there is for upcoming missions, obviously to the moon, and actually it's really optimized for further, right? When you get to Mars, how do you efficiently do the internet in situations like that? Yeah. And so the weird thing is that you could get actually relatively high bandwidth, just really high latencies. So it's very, very different from how the internet works today.
For sure. All right. Let's see. Another question. In the Alexa prize competition, we experienced that having a half a second of latency can have quite an impact on user scores. When getting response times down from 3 seconds to 1.2, we had a huge boost in our scores. And I think he's referring to our skill quality score. This is I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we have a measurement that identifies the quality of an Alexa skill based on a variety of factors, but one of them certainly is latency. And that half second seems to have made a huge difference for them. And when you're having that ping pong in dialogue, the live conversation, If you and I were having a conversation and everything was paused by half a second, that would be a very frustrating conversation for sure.
It would be. For this experience, this space experience, people were very forgiving because of the unique nature and it being a first. But, it was also meant to simulate how, astronauts would actually interact with a local assistant on the vehicle, right? And so imagine, for example, local voice control obviously works, but if there was no other way to get the information, they're a little bit more forgiving for a higher latency in that kind of environment. But you're right. Consumers expect fast response and are very not forgiving for a high latency.
Agreed. Benjamin Anderson, I saw you asked a question here about APL, where you have a touch wrapper with an AVG inside of it, and you have an on-press event that sets some values, and you're trying to change the source to a new SVG. This is not something I think I can solve here on air. But if you want to, what I would recommend first, Benjamin, and this is a good opportunity for me to do my little commercial. If you're not already a member of our Slack community, I would recommend starting there. Go to alexa.design/Slack. You can join there for free, and there's thousands and thousands. I think I haven't checked recently, but I think we're if we haven't already crested 3,000 people, we've got to be really close. We're at 2,942. So Benjamin, you'd get us very close to 3,000. But this community has an APL channel. There are lots and lots of very experienced APL developers that can look at what you're trying to do. You could even just share your raw APL and say, hey, why isn't this working? This is what I'm trying to do. But I would start there. And then, if you don't get a response or you're not getting the kinds of answers you're looking for, I also have some of my folks from what we call our developer advocacy group that are also a part of our Slack community. And they can also identify that, hey, this is a question that needs some more, a deeper dive, and take a look at that. But I know there are even members of the product team, the APL product team, there in that APL channel. So let's start there with your question. As much as I would love to try to take a look at it on air here, I think that might be a tricky one to try to accomplish. But let's start there. And if not, I am on Slack. You can reach out to me directly, and we'll help you figure this one out. But I'm punting on it for now. And please find me in Slack, and I'd be more than happy to try to dig into that for you. Okay, moving on. Gavin said he actually made up the cross-planetary transfer protocol, but it sounds like that is more or less kind of what the description you had for how this stuff all works. Let's see. And Phelpsync.net also mentioned that the Slack community is awesome. I can't say this enough for all of you. If you're thinking about building stuff for voice, you should join the Slack community. You can ask all of the dumb questions you think you have, and you can help really kind of accelerate all of your development by asking the questions that you run into there. It's amazing how helpful and accommodating the community is. I know there are lots of places on the web where you ask a simple question and people are like, that's dumb, you're a beginner, get out of here. That's not how this works here. Folks are really here. It is a community. People are here to encourage you and help you grow as a developer when you're thinking about building stuff for voice. So I can't recommend it enough. All right, I've made it to the end of my questions. And I know you and I, Philippe, have talked about a lot of really interesting things. I'd love to know, is there anything else that you went through this process of getting Alexa into space? Was there anything else that surprised you, or that kind of, maybe there was something that turned out to be difficult that you didn't anticipate?
Oh, sure. So I think the most difficult, one of the more difficult things is, of course, Artemis 1 was a hard mission involving, we were a small part of it, right? There are many other things that needed to happen really well in order for this to happen. And so, we were originally supposed to, fly out in 2019 around November.
Wow.
And so here we are, 2022. One of the more difficult part of this project is, how to work across, years, right? With, potential delays and making sure the technology still works and is up to date and has been very tested. That was one. Getting used to testing, the very limited testing that we could do. And so, for those that might appreciate this, you have the ability to test your skills on a number of Alexa devices. Imagine if you could only do on one device in one particular place, and you had to fly out there, every time you needed to do so. That's
Right.
a little bit of a challenge that we were.
Yeah. But I think a lot of us also don't get, you said you were supposed to launch in 2019. I would imagine most of us don't get an extra 3 years of testing time either.
No, and we were glad to have it because very honestly, we could, it could not have been done.
So I have a couple of other questions. I assume that as they were running the shuttle, they were running as if it was manned, even though there weren't obviously humans on board. Because one of the things that occurred to me is you always hear about how there isn't a medium in space to carry sound. And so when you see space battles in a movie and you hear explosions and laser blasts and things, those obviously wouldn't really happen because there isn't anything to carry that sound to your ears. So I was imagining, without it being manned, I imagine they still had an atmosphere inside the shuttle that was it capable of carrying sound, because that was more or less the medium. You had to run from a speaker to the microphone of the device, right?
That's right. The cabin was pressurized using what you would typically have if it were manned, and the whole reason was, okay, you need to make sure that for the next mission where astronauts will be on board, it's fully tested and will work with the air actually in the cabin. So you don't want to spend 25 plus days in space with a spacesuit. That would not be fun.
No.
No.
So
that was they made sure that, for example, the pressure was adequate for a voice and what would be representative of what would be comfortable for an astronaut.
Great. And then the other thing that stood out to me is that you talked about your testing and using a lot of the existing communication protocols that the shuttle was already using to be able to communicate with the device. As part of your testing process, I would imagine that bandwidth is a precious resource, and that not only you, but a variety of other teams and experiments and scientists and a number of other things want to use that channel to be able to try their thing and experiment with their stuff. Is there a leasing process, a throttling process? Like how do you prioritize your access over everybody else?
Yeah, there's a little bit I can talk about that, and some I can't.
That's fair.
But essentially, the protocol that you use, think of it like TCP is out the door. It's a protocol very similar to UDP.
Okay.
Right. And for people that want to talk to teams that want to do deep space experiments and things like that, we'll typically work with an engineering office from NASA to enable those communications to work. And we took advantage of the fact that Lockheed Martin had already those facilities and those communications channels in place to be able to do those communications. And we work with them on actually our custom protocol to do this. There's no question that we wanted to have a little bit more. For example, we wanted to know how well the device was functioning, but we were very limited into the kind of logging we could send back, just because we were low priority traffic and we needed to keep the bytes down to a minimum.
Wow. Wow. That's something I hadn't even considered, was the upstream communication with logging. I was thinking more about just trying to get your data to the device so that you could run whatever command it is you wanted to run. But yeah, of course, logging and everything else that comes with it has to come back down. That makes sense.
Yeah, just knowing, for example, we had about an hour and a half per day of interaction with the device. And, during that hour and a half, we had initial power up, right? And before anyone came online and interacted with Alexa, we had a team, was there. It's like, is everything working properly? Because, you're in a high radiation environment. A lot can happen that's very different than what you might experience on Earth. So there were a lot of tests that we ran beforehand to make sure that everything, functioned properly. This was not an automated testing environment of any kind.
Right. You can't just slap a set of unit tests up there and go.
Oh my gosh. No, there's no bamboo job up there,
Oh my goodness. You mentioned that, high radiation obviously can have effects that you may or may not be able to anticipate. It's space travel. I have to imagine that there are facilities that they try to simulate or test those kinds of environments here on Earth. Is that true?
Yeah, there are a few two main facilities that are used for testing, um, that we could take advantage of. One of them is kind of a lower fidelity one, and one of is a high fidelity. We had very restricted hours at the high fidelity one, and really that's the one that was like the critical one to pass the test. Um, it was the one thing that was almost impossible to simulate was the acoustic conditions of the craft, because there is only one Orion craft. That's it.
Oh, wow.
There's some mock-ups, but and they're close, but they're not quite acoustically correct. So we had to take I wouldn't call it leaps of faith, but like experience-based design to make sure that it would function properly.
All right. We still have a few minutes left, and there's a couple more questions that have come in here. So Don wants to know, and I think I asked you something similar to this, but if you have anything else to add, that would be great. Are there any discoveries from our experience with Alexa on Artemis that could carry over into the Alexa products that we use today or tomorrow?
Definitely some of the learnings around local voice controls are things that we're going to go forward with that. I would say also, just discussing the use cases with, around like being in an isolated in an industrial environment with high noise was a lot of learning for us. And so we're looking at use cases where, what if you wanted to use Alexa in a industrial design where there's lots of fans going on, and it's critical that Alexa's voice be heard. That's really some of the learning. It's like, okay, in those types of environments, how can we make sure that the reliability is acceptable, and the latency is down?
Perfect. Yeah, I think that the idea of local voice control is something that could dramatically affect a lot of the ways that we think about interacting with these devices. So it's an exciting time for sure. Dana Voice asked a question, and I don't know the story he's referring to, but he says, was the story about the volume true? And what does that mean about real astronauts using the device?
The volume.
I don't know if there was a story or an anecdote about volume leveling inside the shuttle being off or different.
I can talk about that. So we did develop our own audio system to get the audio up there. And one of the things to consider, when you look at the Callisto payload, right? We have a speaker that is the voice intercom. We have the speaker that is the Alexa device. And so just tuning the right audio so that the microphones would correctly be optimized for ASR was a huge actually challenge. In part because the speaker was one that is space rated. So imagine if you were in the going off on board the SLS. There's lots of vibration, so shock and vibe resistant speaker. It's a huge thing. Unfortunately, the audio response of it is terrible, and so it's not good for speech recognition. So actually tuning the audio just correctly so that it would be acceptable for this speaker was one challenge. And the second one was actually the proximity of the microphones to the speaker. A flat surface with audio coming out is unusual, right? So we need to position the microphones slightly differently to make sure to account for that.
Wow. I mean, it's just remarkable to me the number of things that have to be considered and thought about and anticipated just for something like this. I mean, you would never expect a normal Alexa device to be in constant state of vibration. But I mean, it makes perfect sense to me why that would be a major challenge for a device in space to work.
Yeah. If you look at most devices, from Amazon and our third party manufacturers are sealed devices, but they can't really withstand that shock and vibe. Right. They would just destroy themselves.
Yeah. All right. Brian Tarbox has a question. about again, another APL question. He wants to be able to display an image for a few seconds and then go back to a main APL screen. Any suggestions on how to do that? Boy, that's a good question, Brian. I mean, you're thinking about it functioning like a temporary pop-up almost, right? An image that appears above or replacing a bunch of content and then having it swap back out. Off the top of my head, I feel like there's got to be a when condition based on time or something else that might work there, but I haven't tried that before. That's an interesting it's an interesting problem you present. So I'm gonna kick that to Slack and let's see if we can dig into that one, because I think that there are some interesting opportunities for that kind of interaction with the user. Barbara also mentioned that she bets the Bose engineers would love to work on that speaker vibration problem. Yeah, I imagine that's something they'd love to be able to understand a little better.
Bose used to be a partner I work with, so love their products.
Yeah,
love to work with them.
Yeah, my favorite headphones, the ones that have Alexa built in, they don't even make them anymore. I think it's the Quiet Comfort 2s. I think they've moved on beyond those at this point. But man, those are just fantastic headphones.
Great durability. Yeah,
they make some good products. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I don't think I have any more questions for you. I wish that I mean, I would sit here and talk with you for another couple of hours about this, because this is just remarkably fascinating to think about the problem set that is introduced with a voice assistant in space. This is just remarkable. Hey, were you on the team since the beginning, since 2017? You said.
Yeah, that's right. So, Amazon gives us a little time to work on, projects that might not be, for example, full time, right? So I dedicate a little bit of my time to this, over there, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so some of my colleagues, were, dedicated to this effort. For example, we had kind that worked on these problems. With a lot of the work that was performed was really kind of grassroots effort. So, thinking it's a passion play, right? If you're passionate about something, you will actually do off hours work, and you don't mind doing it because it's exciting.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of how these things happen.
I've got to find some secret projects of my own. This sounds amazing. Do you? Was there ever a time that this was your full-time thing, or was it always just kind of a side project?
Oh, at times, we had a couple weeks that were very busy. So, just to give you an example, since some of the testing, we had to do were, offsite, right? Some of the best testing we could do. So, for a week, we would be at a testing facility offsite, and that's all we were doing. And so I was dedicated that week, right?
Yeah.
During testing, that's just something that needed to happen. And so it did happen. And I was happy to do that. And of course, during those testing moments when, we might have, for example, 4 hours to test and another 4 hours that might be dead time. And I was catching up on work during that dead time.
And so I know you said you're a principal solution architect here at Amazon, but can you tell us more about what your day job is?
Oh, for sure. Previous to about 6 weeks ago, I was in charge of the helping our device makers integrate Alexa into their own products, and specifically focusing on multi-agent experiences.
Cool.
And so, think if you might have a product that has multiple voice agents on it, how should that work? So that was a big focus of mine. And then, recently I've been focusing on helping, our Alexa and other devices teams on their back end. So there's a lot of technology, driving how Alexa works inside our data centers. And so that's what I do now.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, hey, I know we're a few minutes shy of the hour, but I think we're just going to put a bow on this one. This has been a fantastic conversation. And I know based on the audience response, this is not the kind of topic that we normally get to cover here. So I'm really glad that they had an opportunity to ask a bunch of their questions, and the insights and the information that you've shared with us. I imagine this is going to go far and wide on the internet after this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have to say and think. But Philippe, I want to be the first to say thank you so much for taking some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, and look forward to seeing what kind of skill innovations this can bring in the future too.
I very much agree, and I'm definitely looking forward to when we can start talking about what is a local environment, what does a local conversation with Alexa look like for in the real world rather than just in these deep space scenarios. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for all of the knowledge you've been willing to share with us today. And to all of you that were here, thank you for the great, insightful questions. This is always a great opportunity for us to learn more about what's going on with Alexa. While it doesn't directly inform a lot of the work that we may be doing today, it gives us a glimpse into what the future might look like. And I think that's equally as exciting. So thank you so much, Philippe. Thank you so much, audience. We're going to call it a day for now. We'll see you guys all next week with Kelly Wenzel, and we'll be talking all about 2022. Take care, everybody.